Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the People's Law School. This is our 18th year of presenting these educational law courses to the public here in Huntsville. We started this around 1985, and now we're presently reaching not only the classes here, which we used to teach twice a year, and that was so hard on us that we just teach it the one time a year, but now we're reaching 2.4 million people in 3 states, from Tennessee down to the Gulf of Mexico. But this program, in it, we try to bring to you the very best lawyers and legal minds around, and tonight is no exception. We have our Congressman Bud Cramer, and contrary to what a lot of people have forgotten, he was once a lawyer, and he.
Once a lawyer, you are a lawyer.
Exactly. Well, I laugh because a lot of people didn't realize that last week when they said Bud Cramer's a lawyer. Absolutely. He used to teach at the People's Law School himself. And he was our district attorney for 10 years. And by the way, brought great dignity to that office and did one well of a job. And they say it's the highest compliment that you can make when a fellow professional, when they unanimously and universally agree that you're a step above everyone else. And Bud Cramer enjoyed that acclaim while he was a lawyer and while he was the district attorney. And, of course, went on to Congress, and you know that's where he's been for the last 10 years. Tonight I want to thank Mayor Spencer, Peter Joffrion, the City Council, and Sandra Moon, and I particularly want to thank Presiding Judge Rodenhauser, who I asked to come here tonight, and we're in his courtroom, and he's the one that's been kind enough to put up with us. He's here, by the way, he and Bud Cramer were classmates when they were younger. A little point of trivia, so Bud has decided to come down and say hello.
Not too far.
Well, I was a youngster. They were the older people, but anyway, I've been trying to get Bud Cramer to come talk to this class for several years, and tonight, fortunately, he has been able to. He's come to see us. I will tell you, I know his schedule today. He was in meetings all day yesterday, and then this morning for breakfast, today at lunch with the TVA board, and so tonight is just another part of his busy schedule. By the way, Bud is a local boy. He was born in Huntsville here in 1947. He went to all the public schools, graduated from Huntsville High School, law school at the University of Alabama in 1972. He was a tank commander in the U.S. Army, and when he got out, he married the beautiful Pat Mitchell, and y'all had a wonderful marriage. And I'll tell you, they have one daughter and now 2 grandsons, and the Cramer family is growing, the extended family, I want you to know. As you know, the Cramers in Huntsville, Alabama are like kudzu. They're everywhere. And there's a lot of them, and Bud has represented us well over the last 10 years in Congress. In Congress, he's a member of the House Appropriations Committee. They handle the money. He'll tell you more about that. He has done a good job there, and it is my pleasure and my privilege tonight to present to you Bud Cramer. Good to see you. And I'm gonna move this.
I feel right at home here with you, and I'm glad that we were finally able to work this out schedule-wise. It's not easy working in Washington, D.C., and then working back on your home turf as well. What I had a hard time understanding is what I was supposed to talk to you about, how to confine what I'm supposed to say to you about. Alan said, just tell them what you've been doing for the last 10 years or so. And that would take me quite a while to do that, and it might overwhelm you with detail that you might not be ready to hear. But I think I can make it somewhat interesting because I think I have an incredibly fascinating job. I work for you in Washington, D.C., and as Judge Rodenhauser and I were talking just before we started this, I come home back to Alabama every weekend. So I'm a commuter to and from Washington, D.C. Occasionally, like next weekend, we've got a committee retreat that will be held, so I will not be home next weekend, but it would take something like that to keep me from coming home every weekend. I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about how we schedule ourselves, how we get ourselves involved in issues, and I really enjoy talking to people about the job. We have town meetings, meetings of all sorts from time to time, and I've been accused of talking the paint off the wall to folks, trying to explain to them how we go about our day-to-day schedule, how we go about, to some extent, making decisions on ways that we vote. I'm in my 6th term, so I've been at this job. When we finish this year, I will have completed 12 years in the job. My tour of duty as DA, as Alan Brinkley said, was 10 years, from 1980 to 1990. That was a 6-year term. In comparison, a 6-year term versus a 2-year term, 6-year term seems like an eternity. You don't look over your shoulder much politically when you have 6 years, even though you're an elected official and the people get to review the job that you've done at least every 6 years in that job. But in this job, it's every other year, and indeed, it's a very different kind of political job to run every 2 years and spend the kind of money that we spend every 2 years. I hope you know this, and I hope I'm not making this so elementary that I'm wasting your time, but across the top of Alabama is the congressional district that, assuming that you're from right around here, not from Tennessee, you live in my congressional district very likely, though you could live in Gunnersville just down the road and you wouldn't live in my congressional district. And just as of about 3 weeks ago, a good part of Morgan County is now not in the 5th congressional district anymore. But when I got the job back in 1990, we had mainly 7 counties across the top of Alabama. The Tennessee River would touch all of those counties. If you sum up your figures, Alabama has 7 members of the House of Representatives. Our state population stayed parallel with the growth of the country, so we stayed at a 7-person House delegation. Some states like Pennsylvania, their population went down. They lost 2 congressional seats. And you have other high growth areas like Arizona, which is gaining, I think, at least 1, maybe 2 congressional seats. A few other states as well. Georgia, I think, gained 2 congressional seats, but some other states as well. New York State lost population, so they ended up losing congressional districts. And it's even harder when you have to re-average based on a loss. In some of those areas, you've got incumbent members that will end up running against one another to see which one will represent the area that they both used to represent. I have been fascinated by the job that I was elected to do. It has been a very difficult job. I came from the district attorney's office. I came from a legal background. I was used to being the elected DA, having 15 or so assistant DAs working for me, hosting grand jury every month, murder, rape, robbery, all the way down to minor misdemeanors were cases that we were charged with prosecuting, including the cases that were prosecuted in juvenile court. You can order what you do to a certain extent when you have that kind of job, because you are the DA, even though there are 15 or so other lawyers that go to the courtroom every day. It's a volume business. You still can review, you still can set policies. You're governed by state law. It's a much more structured way to work than being a member of Congress. When I first got up there, it is a way of life. You're assigned to committees. No assignments, nothing happens there accidentally. Everything is governed by the seniority. Lobby to be on certain committees where there are vacancies available, and then the more senior members will gobble up the more choice committee and subcommittee assignments, and so the class that you're in, the freshman class that you're in my particular case, I think there were 57 of us that came into Congress together. I think 30 or so of those were Democrats and the balance were Republicans. We then were lobbying for the various seats that were available. I immediately knew that realistically I could get to the Transportation Committee, which is where I wanted to be. My predecessor 2 times ago, Bob Jones from Jackson County, was eventually chair of the Transportation Committee and was a very powerful person because he eventually chaired that committee. We had, I knew, a number of transportation projects that we would want to further. The Memphis-Atlanta Highway, which was advocated by North Alabama mayors and legislative groups prior to me getting this job. I knew that if I could be on the Transportation Committee, I would get the chance to perhaps make that highway corridor a reality. Here we are almost 12 years later still working on that reality, but I did go to the Transportation Committee. I did then lobby very hard and have to stand in line to be on the Surface Transportation Subcommittee that would do the ICE-T legislation the first year that I was there, that would be the Intermodal Surface Transportation Efficiency Act that took the place of the Eisenhower Interstate Transportation Bill that had some 20, 25-year impact there. I thought Christmas had come when in the first summer that I was there, we finished the ICE-T bill, and the Memphis-Atlanta corridor was named as one of 20 corridors of national significance in that bill, which mandated that it be given priority funding. We got $25 million to do a corridor study, which is still going on right now. $25 million so that they could hold a public hearing, so that they could inventory the historic sites, the environmental issues that they would have to take into consideration in routing a highway like that. My idea was that we would spend that $25 million. It would take 4 or 5 years to get the route determined, and then we would start the process of appropriating money to build the corridor itself. Well, here we are 12 years later, and we don't have an official final route for that highway corridor. So my Christmas pretty soon turned into a tortuous summer that seemed like it would never end, and it's not over yet. We did have some tugs of war between counties along the route. Everybody wanted it to go north of the river or south of the river, had a preference on the way that it went. And we have had, it's hard for me to count now, about 4 different governors since I've held this job. So we've had 4 different state transportation directors, and your state transportation department is block granted most of the federal money, so they, in conjunction with the Federal Highway Administration, they make the highway determinations, not members of Congress that get the piece of legislation passed and get the corridor mandated in there. But I have pounded the table, I have talked, I've been to Montgomery, everything I could to make sure that this highway corridor doesn't outlive me, even though it will outlive me because it will not be built, probably finished in my lifetime unless we're very, very lucky. But what I did is I kind of quickly jumped into a legislative issue and a committee issue in giving you that example of going to the Transportation Committee, and within the first few months, the impact that that committee ended up having that had North Alabama impact. By the way, that very first ICE-T bill that we wrote that summer, in addition to the Memphis-Atlanta Highway, we got full turnkey funding to build a Keller Bridge replacement, which we're all driving over from time to time between over there in Morgan County, right into Decatur proper. We got turnkey money to finish the 4-laning of Highway 72 in Jackson County, which took considerably longer than what it took to build the Keller Bridge replacement bridge over there. And then we got some money for the big bridge project over in the Shoals area that's still not through yet, called the Patton Island Bridge project as well. But by far and above, the biggest area issue there was the Memphis-Atlanta Highway. Now, I'm not on the Transportation Committee anymore because I've used my seniority. Out of 435 House members, I have a seniority number every term of Congress. I'm in my 6th term. Think where I might be in the seniority level. Would I be in the first 100, first 200, first 300? Surely. After this length of time, I've seen a lot of change there. My seniority number is right at 100. I'm in the first 100 people in seniority there out of 435. That has given me the opportunity in and of itself to go to the Appropriations Committee, which is the committee that I'm now on. That's where I wanted to be all along, was on the Appropriations Committee if I could get there. That's the committee that every funding issue goes through. That's the committee that spends the money. From DOD budgets to veterans budgets to NASA budgets to Weather Service budgets, you name any part of the federal government, and one of our 13 subcommittees will have the funding bill that funds that particular agency or those particular agencies. But it took me close to 3 terms to wait in line long enough. Alabama's a small state. 7 members of the House is small in number compared to most other states. And these seats are assigned regionally, and they're assigned by a leadership process that is very complicated. It'd take me another hour to explain that process to you. But part of it has to do with the way they judge you and the ability that they think you have, and whether in your particular region, our region is Alabama, Tennessee, Mississippi, and Louisiana, whether somebody from that region is already on the committee, how many are on the committee, and so forth. So Tom Bevel, who was in Congress for more than 30 years and represents the district right below all of us, called the 4th Congressional District, that runs from Jasper all the way over to Gadsden. Mr. Bevel was a senior member of the Appropriations Committee, and in fact his seniority was such he chaired one of the subcommittees, so he was called a cardinal there. And I knew until Mr. Bevel chose to leave Congress, if he ever did, and I didn't necessarily want him to do that, that I would never stand a chance because Alabama was not going to have 2 members on the House Appropriations Committee. Mr. Bevel ended up leaving Congress. I had to wait about a year after he left. Then I moved to the Appropriations Committee. But interestingly, we now have 3 out of our 7 House members that are on appropriations. And we got there remarkably by just in each our own way. So 3 on the House side, and Senator Shelby on the Senate side is on the Appropriations Committee as well. So you add our 2 senators in with our 7 House members, 9-person delegation. Out of the 9, 4 of us are on the Appropriations Committee, which is a reason why a week or so ago there was a TV program that questioned why 4 or 5 states or thereabout. I didn't see this, but it's reported to me why those states got an extraordinary amount of transportation dollars. Alabama was one of those states, and we did it because of our placement on the Appropriations Committee. I don't know if you know this either. I didn't know it until I got this job. Do you know how many jobs we have right here in the 5th District tied to federal budgets? Now, my constituent population is a little more than 600,000 people that live in my congressional district. We've got probably 50,000 jobs tied to federal budgets. So when somebody says to me, and this is a real-life situation that occurred at Atlanta Airport one time, get the federal government off my back, I have to say, now wait a minute, which part of the federal government do you want off your back? I had a man that was very, very upset in the Atlanta airport once. I spend a lot of time in airports. And he said, I just want you to get the federal government off my back. And I said, well, what do you mean by that? And he said, the way y'all spend money. We don't need to be spending. The federal government, he had a very limited idea of the federal government. I said, where do you work? It's just always curious, where do you live, where do you work, or kind of natural questions. He worked at TVA. And I said, it's a federal utility, and people in Indiana view you as part of the problem with the federal budget and the federal deficit. Be careful what you wish for, because, and I said, where do you work at TVA? It was a line item connected to the federal budget. And I said, I had an extended conversation with him, either fortunately or unfortunately, because my plane was late, and after a while he said, just forget what I said. Never mind about that. He was very clear in summarizing that. I don't think, sometimes we stop and think the federal government, of course, is sometimes too big, too bureaucratic. Part of what I do for my constituents with casework is try to intervene with the veterans system, or intervene with the Social Security system, or intervene with some part of the bureaucracy. EPA will drive you nuts from time to time too, but they're our worst enemy one day and then our best friend on another day as well. But it's curious to kind of work through all of that. Now, when we go back, I will go back to Washington mid-morning tomorrow morning. We will start voting tomorrow night at 6:30. Our schedules in that regard are pretty clear every week, except that I can't tell you right now when we will finish for the week. We carry all kinds of devices now that allow us to communicate. I don't know if you've ever seen a BlackBerry, but after September the 11th, we were all in these little BlackBerries, and if you cue into this message right now, I just got beeped about this about an hour and a half ago with the schedule for the week. They've added 8 suspension bills. I'm scrolling through here to the schedule for tomorrow. Then we're doing campaign finance reform on Wednesday. Now, that'll be a general issue for us up there. We've been waiting for years to do that. We won't know until we won't know until Wednesday morning how many amendments there will be to campaign finance reform, what those amendments will amount to. So you can't really size up where you're coming from until you see what a rule must pass from the Rules Committee, which allows certain amendments or doesn't allow certain amendments. It can be an open rule, and an open rule means any member of Congress during the debate can stand up and offer any amendment that member of Congress wants to offer. Open rules are sometimes dreaded because on big bills like campaign finance reform, if you have an open rule, you're going to be there for a long, long time, because members that sometimes want to defeat a piece of legislation will constantly come up with poison pill amendments or other kind of damaging, wounding amendments in order to make a particular piece of legislation not passable by the members. If it's a closed rule, then the Rules Committee will have determined X number of amendments, whose amendment it is. They will then publish those amendments, and then those amendments have to be available in print for us to review before the debate starts. So a lot of that goes on literally in the middle of the night. And so I can't tell you that we'll finish on Thursday, or if we'll finish Thursday night, or Friday morning, or just when. So I have this little retreat during the weekend next weekend. I don't know if we'll be there for it on Friday, or we'll get there Friday afternoon or Friday night to do this particular retreat. It could be that this is a week where I had hoped to, like last week might have been, where you knew the new NASA administrator is coming to visit the Marshall Space Flight Center. I wanted to be there to greet him at a lunch on Friday. If that had happened to be this Friday, you just have to roll the dice, and you're not probably going to know until Thursday midday exactly what kind of progress you've made that would enable you to know whether you will get out at that night or the next morning. Robert Adderholt now, Mr. Bevel has retired from Congress from the 4th District. Robert Adderholt holds that seat. Robert Adderholt and I were in Decatur this past Friday morning to meet with a big group from Morgan County, because we both now represent Morgan County. He did not have any of Morgan County until 2 weeks ago. Now it looks like, unless this lawsuit that's involved in redistricting goes through, it looks like Robert Adderholt and I will share Morgan County. Well, if that had been this week, there would be a fair chance that we might not have been there. So you hate that, because you hold different groups hostage, and that's why, Alan, from time to time we couldn't give you a very clear answer, and then your schedule opens up, and all of a sudden you're home, and people see you and they wonder, well, why couldn't you have done that? It's just a matter of scheduling. This kind of thing used to, not this, but the schedule that represents used to drive me the craziest. It was so unpredictable and so difficult. Let me give you a little idea. We all, until we got the BlackBerries where I can scroll through my daily schedule, this is a computer-generated printout schedule for the line items that, say, tomorrow will go on in the office before I get there and will be available for me to participate in. Things like the Alabama Toyota employees will be there tomorrow afternoon. The Alabama delegation, all 7 members, will meet to talk about redistricting, whether we want to go to court to challenge what the legislature did or whether we want to leave it there. There's a reception tomorrow night put on by Toyota. And as you know, and I'm going to get into economic development issues in a few minutes, Toyota is building a big truck engine plant here. We've become very close with the North American Toyota folks. There's a documentary film preview tomorrow night. There's a Blue Dog meeting that we have every week a group of conservative Democrats that I co-founded back in 1994. We meet every, what is tomorrow, Tuesday. We used to meet on Wednesday, so I occasionally lapse into thinking we're still meeting on Wednesday, but we now meet every Tuesday, anywhere from 5 to 5:30 for about 2 hours. And tomorrow night's program for us will be campaign finance reform, because that's what we'll be taking up when we get back there this week. I haven't told you every line item entry on here because it would be just too much detail, but this is the startup time for our new budget year. The President comes and speaks to us in the State of the Union address, which hopefully you all got to see. It's a remarkable time to be there with the President. The first State of the Union address that I attended there awed me, and I'm still awed by what I see there. I went at that time, it starts at 9 o'clock Eastern Time, 8 o'clock Central Time. I went there about 7 to take my seat. You see, that's in the House hall. That's where we do our business. You watch C-SPAN, you watch the House of Representatives, you'll see us on our turf there in a room, it seems like it's 40, 50 times bigger than this. The State of the Union is there because the club down the hall, called the Senate, is 100 in number, and they're much smaller, and they have desks and a very refined room to work in. We're Animal House compared to the Senate. We've got to have a much bigger room. We don't have assigned seats, so I don't have a seat specific to me, though by tradition and just by habit, you generally go to a particular area of the floor. If you face the room, the right-hand side is the Democratic side, the left-hand side is the Republican side, divided by the very middle corridor that the President comes down when he delivers the State of the Union address, or any foreign head of state that addresses a joint session of Congress. We have to make room on the State of the Union night for all the senators, the diplomatic corps, the Supreme Court. President's cabinet comes in as well. It's fun to be there. And the best place to be is right on that aisle, to get an aisle seat. Well, when I went 2 hours early my first year, I had to sit about 5 seats away from the aisle. Members get there very early. So the next year I went 3 hours early and got within 3 seats of the aisle. Well, the next year I was determined that I was going to be there, so I went about 4.5 hours early, and I got that last corner seat, the first one that would greet everybody as they came in the door. I felt like the official welcoming committee. It's always fun when the Vice President comes in, and he comes in first with the Speaker, and then they move up to the chair. And see, it's our chamber, so our Speaker of the House presides, and the Vice President, because he's President of the Senate, presides up there with him, and then the President actually speaks from the next level down. So it's really neat. It's a fun time. I mean, we're loud, we're boisterous, there's a little hissing that goes on from time to time, lots of clapping that goes on from time to time. It's an interesting time. And I remember another time when the Queen of England came to address us in a joint session of Congress. I also happened to be on the very aisle seat there. But you just don't shake hands and slap on the back the Queen of England, you know. You don't touch the Queen of England. So that was a little hard for us to restrain ourselves from the way that we normally go about conducting ourselves. But ceremonially, that's an awesome opportunity for us to kick off our year and to hear from the President. And then shortly after that, the President delivers us a budget, which is volumes long. And then we in our committee start taking up that budget, holding hearings, inventorying where the agencies are coming from, what they want to accomplish in their budget cycle. And then on the Appropriations Committee, then we end up what we call marking up a piece of legislation, parliamentary term, to mark up a bill that will then determine what is the Veterans Department's budget, what is NASA's budget, what can we live with within those particular bills. It's tough to do an overall budget and balance the budget. Even some of my colleagues sometimes don't make themselves stop and come up with a budget that would enable them to understand that you can't have everything you want when you've only got X billions of dollars coming in. So, and as much as I've described this process, it is chaotic. It is chaotic up there. You're having hearings. Sometimes the hearings overlap votes on the floor. You've got constituent groups that are in your office. You've got school groups that are sometimes there and on the steps of the Capitol that you want to go say hello to. You've got external receptions that are held there. My first March there. March is the most active time of year in the House and in the Senate, I suspect as well. Every group wants to get their members up there in late February into March because it's early in the legislative year. They want to come to the office. They want to lobby you. They want to tell you what they want and what they don't want in a particular piece of legislation. Last week we kicked off, we had physicians in. There were maybe 18, 19 physicians that were all over my congressional district that they had a dinner the night before. And we weren't up, I wasn't there for the dinner, but my office was there for the dinner because we normally define our weeks by when we start voting. The physicians determine in order for them to get a room for 500 physicians from the state of Alabama to have a dinner in, they've got to book that over a year ahead, so they pick out their Monday night and just hope we're there. Well, we're hardly ever there on a Monday night this early in the year, so they often know that the members themselves will likely not be there. But then they come to our office the next day by appointment, divide up by regions of the state. They come around and talk to us. Patients' Bill of Rights was a very controversial and difficult piece of legislation that we passed last year. They wanted to thank me for the way I voted on that. That's part of what they did this year. Last year, they were saying, please see your way through this particular piece of legislation. Please, even though we're months ahead of it, this is last year, we anticipate there'll be these types of amendments, and you can't say exactly when you're months away from a piece of legislation, but they were right. They sized it up pretty well, and we hung in there with them. We also had the school boards up last week, so I had about 12 school board members from across Alabama that came into the office to talk about education issues and the predicament that Alabama's in and how it was important for them to have particular pieces of legislation funded for this next year that would hopefully plug some of the gaps that existed last year. There were a number of other people that were in the office on that same day, but that's just quick examples of the type groups. In March, you may have 20 to 25 groups in your office every 10 to 15 minutes, ranging from 2 and 3 in number to 40 or 50 in number. And each one of those groups, the organization that they're a part of will likely have a nighttime reception, a morning breakfast, or a luncheon. And sometimes some combination of two of those that they will want you or your office to be represented at. My first March there, I remember one night I'd been to about 8 or 9 receptions and missed about 4 or 5 because I just logistically couldn't get from point A to point K to point X during the night. And I remember going back to my little place where I was sleeping and thinking, I can't live like this. I've made a horrible mistake. I want to go back. I want my job in the DA's office back. We'll just call it even and I'll go back home because I was overwhelmed by what I was doing. I just could not sort all of that out. I'd voted in a given day. In March, you might vote 8, 9 times. You might vote 15, 20 times. There are plenty of nights when we're there when we're voting all night long. There's a suggestion by this BlackBerry that tomorrow night we may go all night long on campaign finance reform. That's difficult. I'm getting too old to stay up all night long voting, but we still do it. And we tell the newer members that are there now, you have no idea how hard it used to be. Back in 1994, we were there for 40 straight days, parts of the night. This is nothing compared to that, we'll tell one another there. It is interesting to watch the new freshman classes come in. Now, we're mid-term right now, so the freshman class that I'm now still calling freshmen would have been sworn in not this past January, but January a year ago. And I think there were about 58 or 59 of them. Sometimes the freshman class, the largest freshman class that we've had since I've been there has been 110 in number. 110 out of 435 were freshmen. And it's interesting to watch them bounce off the wall and try to get their sea legs straight. I wouldn't want to be 16 again ever. Might want to be 24, 25 again, but not 16. And I wouldn't want to be a freshman member of Congress again for all the money in the world. I wouldn't go through that again. It's a horrible time to kind of have to get acquainted with the reality of the way you work there. Now, also a part of our day, I have 8 people that work in Washington 8 staffers in our office building there, and I have 3 offices in North Alabama. I have one in Huntsville, I have one in Decatur, and I have one in the Shoals area. The one in Decatur is in the courthouse, and that was an office that I added that had not existed before I got this office. So I have, I think, 8 people that work for me in Alabama. I say I think because a couple of them are part-time now. And we've got a transition position that we're in the process of deciding what we want to do about that. So essentially 8 in Alabama and 8 in Washington, D.C. Some of my colleagues have 20 and 30 counties in their congressional district. Some have, like the state of Montana is one congressional district. So that presents different challenges. Mine's very efficient. Huntsville is almost the geographic center of North Alabama, not quite. We're a little east of the geographic center. So it's easy for me to get from Huntsville to different parts of this congressional district when I'm home. I go to the Shoals a lot. I go to Scottsboro, Bridgeport, the far corners of the congressional district. Some of my colleagues, when they go home, they spend the night away from home in order to get around their congressional districts, which I think would be even harder. And just think, I'm one time zone away. California members, a lot of the California members go home every weekend. And I think, oh my goodness, I'm waking up, 6 o'clock in the morning, 5 o'clock in the morning because I've been in Washington for 4 or 5 days, and then I get up there and I get 1 hour a little off there. I wonder what it would be like if you were from California. But they're very dedicated. And those members, for the most part, I think work very, very hard. Where I sometimes question the difference in the way I work and the way they work is a lot of them, some of them, not a lot I shouldn't say, some of them just regularly want to be on C-SPAN so they can be seen and be heard. And the harder work is not on C-SPAN. The harder work is the behind-the-scenes job you have to do. For example, if you want to get a weather forecast office, like I've struggled to get for us here in North Alabama almost the whole time that I've been there. And I thought that also was going to outlive me, but we finally got line item funding last year for our weather forecast office, which will be open this summer here. We've never had a weather forecast office. We've had good protection when we had a weather service office, and they tried to take all that away from us, but we will get that. That's hard to do behind the scenes, and the harder work comes there that you and your staff have to be extremely deliberate about. Now, the 8 people that work for me, they are assigned issues. Jenny Bodigal, who's a legislative assistant, she's a young woman from Huntsville. She's a lawyer. She's worked for me for a few years now. Even when she was in law school, she would work for me during the summers. Her issues, among others, I probably can't even name all her issues. She's got health care issues, so medical, nursing issues would be her. She's got children's justice issues as well. So Jenny's got in her corner of the legislative arena up there a full load of issues. I have one staffer who mainly only does DOD issues, Department of Defense issues, our Army issues, National Missile Defense issues, and all the line items we have connected to that budget. One person, right now that's Carter Wells, who also is from Huntsville. That's all Carter does. He's got other issues mixed in there, but they're not at all as demanding as the DOD issues. Then one legislative assistant that handles NASA's issues, Tom Koshin. Tom's not from here, but he worked at the Marshall Space Flight Center. He moved here. I think he was educated in New York State, moved here. He's a physicist, and we're lucky to have him. We got him first because he was assigned to us as a NASA fellow to work in our office, and now he's on my staff there. And then Dana Gresham, who's from Birmingham, who is my legislative director. It's his job to oversee all the legislative issues. And when I'm voting on a particular day, I have 17 minutes when I'm beat to vote to get to the floor to cast my vote using my voting card. Electronically, we vote. But we have to do that in person. Dana, it's his job to find me wherever I am, and that can sometimes be interesting in and of itself, to find me and to tell me what a particular vote is all about. Now, that's something that I worried about talking to an audience about. Therefore, what do you mean to tell you what you're supposed to vote about? Isn't that your job? You take campaign finance reform this Wednesday into Thursday and say we've got 10 amendments there. and say, well, I've been in a hearing having to do with NASA's issues. They've taken up 3 of those amendments. I don't know if they voice voted 1 or 2 of them, if we're going to vote on those 1 or 2, or at the end of the day, if we voted 10 times already, he's going to know more consistently than I will know, because I'll be doing meetings with constituent groups and all. Now, Dana, that's right. Did we pass? We passed 5 out of the 10. We didn't pass this particular poison pill amendment, but this other one did pass. Now we've got final passage. Help me size this up now. And I've got 17 minutes to do it. That's counting the walking time and subway ride from my office to wherever we go. I missed my first vote. We vote maybe 1,200, 1,400 times in a given year. I missed my first vote my first few months there because I was on the Senate side attending the confirmation hearing of a young woman as a U.S. District Judge from Decatur. Her family, Barney Lovelace's family, Sharon Blackburn from Decatur, she was having her hearing on the Senate side. I wanted to go over there and tell her how proud I was of her and say hello to her and the family. I thought I would be buzzed on the Senate side, but the Capitol's divided right in the middle. And the Senate vote notices work on the Senate side, but the House notices aren't noticed on the Senate side. So I failed to be alert to that. And in fact, I worked it in. I dashed over there to say hello to them and came straight back to the Capitol. And as I was cutting across the back of the Capitol, I could see all these members running up the steps, and I knew a vote was on, so I tore over there and I missed the vote by just 30, 40 seconds. But that's how I missed my first vote. Most members do miss a vote or 2 a year, or maybe 8 or 9 a year. And that's, I keep about a 98% voting record. Sometimes you're back in Alabama and you choose purposefully not to go back because we've had BRAC hearings, base realignment and closure hearings here that the delegation wanted to be a part of, and we all just chose to be here to be a part of that and miss votes that were up there. You try not to miss the important votes, and you weigh what the important votes are. There's one other issue that I want to bring up, and that's the issue of mail. We've got about 15 more minutes. I thought I would have a hard time really filling up this 55 minutes. We get thousands of pieces of communication every month, but I would say about 65, 70% of those are email communications now. Much different than it was back when I first got there in the early 90s. But for each email communication, if you email my office and say, I'm concerned about campaign finance reform and please vote for it, and you may be informed enough to know that there's going to be an amendment to it that you think will kill it, and you don't want to see that amendment passed, and you can communicate that to me by email, we will answer your email with a letter. There's security reasons for that we've been advised by the House folks that we should answer those emails not by an email back, which would be a lot easier, but we send you a letter back. I sign all of my mail, and that takes, out of every 3 days, that may take 2 hours out of my schedule, and I try not to let it get too far behind. I enjoy signing the mail. I get to read the letter, scan the letter that's come into me, scan the email that's come into me, and then sign the letter that has been pre-prepared for me by the office. And sometimes people will write and say, I know I'm going to get a form letter back. I know the congressman's never going to see this, but I sure want y'all to pay attention to this particular issue. And I put a lot of notes on the bottom of my mail. I say, I did read your message, and I do read all of my mail. Now, what we do sometimes, we may get 150 emails like yours, and sometimes they're verbatim alike, and we can pretty much deduce from that you've been alerted to be concerned about this particular issue by, say, an outside group, which is your right to be a part of, and you've chosen to communicate with us that way. Sometimes we get postcards, and all the postcards are pre-printed, and you sign your name and address on those. Well, we answer all of those. The mail that I get, some people handwrite mail, some people still type on old-fashioned typewriters that are beginning to look stranger and stranger as this computer age creeps on. And the mail's a very interesting part of our life up there. To those 150 emails that are coming through, we may sit down at the first of the week and say, these are the letters we're getting about campaign finance reform. Let's talk about a reply. Sometimes I will have been the spark for the reply. Sometimes the reply will have been recommended to me. Sometimes I will read that reply and I'll say, no, this is not informative. It's not responsive. I don't like this reply. Ditch it, and let's do another one together. So I have a lot of say-so about my mail, and my mail I take very, very seriously. I also enjoy, every now and then, I mean, I used to keep a special drawer for special letters that I would get. I don't have a file cabinet big enough to keep those special letters in, but think about it. People are motivated to write, communicate with you because they're bothered by something, or they're even upset by something, or something's driving them crazy, or they feel very passionate about something. So you get some very interesting letters. Very nice letters and very not nice letters at all. And I used to save a lot of the real not nice ones because I just thought, wow, I didn't know you could be so not nice in that way. And then every now and then, you know, some of them are pretty sick, saying things that they hope will happen to you and your family, and they get real specific with them. It's bizarre. But every now and then, this one man that I had fun with for a few years would bury in the middle of his 7, 8 page letter like, "You'll never see this, Congressman Cramer. I'll bet you a steak dinner you'll never see this." And I wrote him down there, "You owe me a steak dinner because I read every bit of your letter. I didn't enjoy it, but I read every bit of it." And then my office will then fold these. I don't fold them up and lick the thing, or I don't think they do that anymore. But they came back. I think they read everything I jot a note down on. There's no privacy up there to speak of. But then they came running back in there a few years later and said, "He's back. That man that challenged you a few years ago over the steak dinner, read this." And I thought, no, I'm supposed to catch this, not you. And so I read it, and he said, "I'm the guy that wrote you a few years ago and promised you a steak dinner, and I bet you don't see this one. I bet that was a fluke and just an accident or something." And he said he'd buy me a steak dinner again, and I put on the bottom of his letter, and it was just as bad or worse letter from my point of view. And I said, "You now owe me 2 steak dinners, but I don't want to eat with you, and I don't think you want to eat with me. So write a check to the Children's Advocacy Center for $25, and I want a copy of the check." Well, I, of course, never got a copy of the check. I never heard from him that I know of again, but I'm looking to hear from him, and I do get a comment or two in there. And when I recognize who people are for one reason or another, I like to put a note on there because I think it's important for people to know that some of us do pay that much attention to what goes on there. Now, I want to segue from kind of life up there to life down here in the Congressional District, because when I'm home, it's an interesting opportunity to interface with the people that you represent in your Congressional District. And I've always, in the close to 12 years that I've been there, I've come home essentially every weekend. As I said, there are some exceptions to that. In the month of August, we get just about the whole month to spend in our congressional districts. And around the 4th of July, we get an extended period of time. Around Easter, we get an extended period of time. And during the month of December, where normally we try to recess sometime between October and November, though theoretically we hardly ever do that. This past year, our target adjournment date was October the 12th, and we recessed December the 20th. So while theoretically you're supposed to have the month of December to be back home, to roam around your districts, very often you're not able to do that. But August is a wonderful exception. It's a bracketed, I have a master calendar that we get early in the year that shows you in a framework of what are voting days and what are not voting days. When those are the boundaries that are pretty well honored. It's the in-betweens when you can't predict whether you'll be there all night. And often this time of year you're finishing early, and you've been at this for 12 years, and you kind of bet, now I bet you we finish early on this particular day. So tell the Decatur folks that I think Robert Adderholt and I can be over there for Friday morning. And then as the week wears on, you think, please let us be out, because we've let those, I mean, they had a program printed, and the program was set. But back when we get to August, this coming August, you'll see the whole month is filled in with summer district work period. And so you have much more time in August. We have interns, young people that work with us in the summertime, some 8 or 9 in number. and some of them get assigned to work there in August, and we're just all gone in August, and they don't get to see the activity up there that the others would get to see. June and July are very busy months up there, and then when we come back after Labor Day, we're trying to wind up, get ready for the end of our fiscal year when we're supposed to have finished all the budgets. But when you come back home for those extended times, or like I was this weekend, when you hosted the NASA administrator, we had our third TVA board member that offered to come down here and be at a luncheon program with me today and to sit down with me and for us to begin to get to know one another. That's what you take advantage of your at-home time. But then you've got your farmers that want the opportunity to weigh in with you, your teachers that want to weigh in with you, your hospital folks that have been after you to get to this nursing home or get to this hospital from all four corners of my congressional district. That is equally hard. It's kind of balancing what you do geographically, balancing what you do by issues. But I did want to take one stab at telling you also what I enjoy is being a representative for the state of Alabama. I get to interface with a lot of companies that might be interested in locating plants here or doing business here. I've gotten more and more involved in economic development recruitment. I can knock on a door in Chicago, U.S. Gypsum, and say, has Jackson County got a place for you? I can knock on Target Stores Distribution Center office up in Minneapolis or outside Minneapolis in Minnesota and say, I know you're looking at our area to build a distribution center. I want you, this is the way I work. This is how I think I can make a difference for you. Go into California when the Boeing Company, who's our good neighbor and has been a good employer here for years and years and years, but when they were deciding where to locate that Delta IV rocket plant, I was there with them and said, boy, have we got a place for you. Of course, they were looking at 3 places in Alabama there. I think I'm pretty good at that. I think I've made a big difference with that. I think the Toyota plant announcement, we've got several other irons in the fire, but across my district, I love being able to call on those companies and to say, this is what I'm all about, this is what our delegation is all about. Please come and take a look at Alabama because I think you'll find it's a place that you will want to do business. Thank you for giving me the chance to scroll through a lot of this. And Alan, I could have gone on for 20 or 30 more minutes,
well, but... you just think you're getting out of it. Here's the deal. Promise them that if you would come tonight that you would answer at least 5 questions. So, just like they do on Johnny Carson, what I'm going to do so you can hear the question, is there anybody that has a question they want to ask Congressman Cramer, if you would?
Oh, no.
Congressman,
look at these hands.
1 second. Thaddeus? Would you have it? Okay. Have you got enough tape, Thaddeus? Go ahead.
Congressman.
1 second.
Okay.
Oh, am I out of...
You've just spent some time with TVA board. I think it's interesting since 1933 Act was passed that we have not had a member from Alabama on the board. One. Secondly, we have a very underutilized facility sitting over in Jackson County that needs to be
called Bellefonte.
Generating electricity from whatever source. So is there anything going on that? That's jobs.
We've got now 3 TVA board members that are new members, so to speak. We've got Glenn McCullough, who's the chair of the board from Mississippi. We've got Skyla Harris from Kentucky, who's a board member, and now Bill Baxter, who's from the Knoxville area. We have felt discriminated against and have felt that Alabama has, we've never had a TVA board member. Years ago, it was thought that Ronnie Flippo, my predecessor, would be a good representative on the TVA board. And then recently, in the more recent past, we've offered other names as well. With this board, we've raised the issue, and on the Senate side, there have been a bill or 2 that have been introduced to expand the board size, mainly to make sure that we were accommodated on the board. We've got to be careful about what size the TVA board gets, because we need for them to be responsive. And if you get to be a real big board, then people tend to kind of dodge that kind of responsibility. TVA's got some tough decisions to make, mainly in the nuclear power area. You got Browns Ferry, that they will likely restart Browns Ferry, and then Bellefonte, that has sat there for years and years. Today, Bill Baxter, in talking to the group that I assembled for lunch, addressed the issue of Bellefonte and Browns Ferry in a very positive way. I want to tell you, I think TVA has changed a lot. In my 12 years of trying to work with TVA, TVA has been one of the most difficult bureaucracies I've had to try to intervene with. They generally did not make decisions. They passed decisions on in their layers of bureaucracy. It has been a nightmare for me. And I used to have to war with them and then back up, so I felt like good cop one day, bad cop another day. And I said to Bill Baxter today, I've had a love-hate relationship with TVA. I mean, TVA, the act, the damming, the beauty of this area, the land issues that they're involved in, they've helped make us the prosperous, clean area that we are. We've got cheap electricity. It needs to stay that way, but their bureaucracy has been a challenge. They've gotten better in the last 2 or 3 years. Their board members, Target Stores Distribution Center, Mayor Spencer called me on a Friday afternoon. I was headed south, meaning south in my district. I wasn't leaving the country or anything, but she had an issue that she needed an answer on within a few hours, and even before Glenn McCullough got there, I got Craven Crowell, who'd been through we'd been through some tough times with, and I got him on the phone. I said, Craven, cut to the chase. This is what I've got to have. This will make a difference in whether we get this distribution center or not. We were competing against a Tennessee community for the Target Stores Distribution Center. And I was afraid that TVA from Tennessee would not help me. They didn't have a clue that Target Stores Distribution Center was looking at this area in Tennessee. So they came to the table, they put what we needed on the table in terms of an economic development incentive. We got the Target Stores Distribution Center. I have enjoyed working with these board members, and Bill Baxter today made a very good impression on me, and everything I know about him from Knoxville, he's interested in running the agency in a very business-like way.
You've touched on a hot button several times already tonight. I think I know where you stand on campaign finance reform. Do you have any feel for what the outcome's going to be in the next couple of days?
Right. The issue of campaign finance reform, which we will take up tomorrow, part of it will depend on which amendments they allow, whether there are a couple of amendments that we learned about last week that will be killing amendments, that if those amendments pass, the effect of campaign finance reform will be lost, and we will do such a watered-down version of it that it won't amount to anything. However, today, when I was driving in between meetings today, I heard that several prominent, y'all may have heard more specifics of this, several prominent American business people came out and said that we've got to have this passed, and we're putting pressure. We're coming to Washington to put pressure on members to pass it. So I'm hopeful that will allow us to get it passed.
My question has to do with security. You mentioned that you have gone in and out of the airports. I want to get your assessment on how do you feel about security as you being addressed. Do you have to stay in line for 2 or 3 hours? The reason why I asked this, I was watching 60 Minutes last night, and Andy Rooney was saying that he had to go through so much security, had to show this type of identification, and some of the executives bypassed the inspection as far as 2 or 3 hours. So give us some access about security.
I was in Washington on September the 11th. And so I was away from my district, and they shut our airports down there. TVA sent an airplane for us and took us home that first weekend that we were there. So then I started flying in and out of Dulles and in and out of BWI there because Reagan National Airport was closed for many weeks there. Initially, the security was heavy because they were watching everything in our bags and going through our bags. I've never gotten what I consider to be any kind of special treatment. In fact, regularly now I am required to take my shoes off, and I'm required to let them hold up everything I'm pulled out of line, and on the direct Huntsville flight that we now have back, and they go through everything and let everybody watch them go through everything that's in my carry-on bag. I don't have to carry on that much because I have a place to sleep at both ends and a toothbrush at both ends of where I go to and from. But it has taken me as long as, maybe not 2 hours, but it's taken me close to 2 hours to get through security. It all depends on what time you leave, which airport you go out of.
God bless America, land that I love. Stand beside her and guide her through the night with a light